Now we got a report. Dan Wilson said he was in fear for his life. The only gun there was Dan Wilson's. Strange parallels in all these cases.
You know, I think it's getting more and more dangerous. And I think that if there is rioting, God forbid, after a non-indictment or whatever happens in Ferguson, I think statements like this and Jesse Jackson telling me no circumstances would have warranted the cop in Ferguson shooting Michael Brown. No circumstances. I think we're entering new uncharted waters, and it's not good. David Swerdlick, columnist for the Root.com, also, of course, contributing editor, joins us. David, welcome. You know, we're getting more and more indication. The governor today of Missouri, I believe, an effort to in anticipation of a non-indictment possibility, saying that he started this Ferguson commission and praising the protesters. The Attorney General said, well, you know, we're going to investigate it like everything else, and the former police chief of Ferguson says there'll be no indictment. The New York Times story on Saturday talking about the beating in the car, the shooting of the gun in the car, the blood on the gun in the car, and the officer, the broken jaw, whatever it was, the punch to the face. I mean, it all looks like there's a good chance of no indictment, that this cop was justified. And then you get people like Sharpton saying, well, only one person had a gun. Now, either he's an idiot or he's inciting, in my opinion.
Yeah, Steve, I don't think he's inciting. Look, I see exactly what you're saying in terms of the possibility of no indictment, right? I mean, I think after everything you just described, including the New York Times article in the last few days, definitely there is this sense out there that there may be no indictment against Officer Darren Wilson. And frankly, unless one of us was there, we can't know for certain what would happen. I think one of the reasons that civil rights leaders like Reverend Sharpton and others are sort of raising an alarm is because there is this generalized sense of mistrust about what's going on with the St. Louis County prosecutors and with the Ferguson police, going all the way back to the day that Michael Brown was shot. We don't know what happened that day, but there is this mistrust among African Americans in particular, and I think other Americans as well, that the way this has been handled by the police, with the leaking of information, with the way they suppress demonstrations, that there is not a sense of justice being done here, even if it turns out potentially that Officer Wilson did have a justification for using his weapon, but we don't know that. That I think
no,
is the
but if it turns out he did, so what are we talking about? They didn't like the way information was leaked. They didn't like the way the case was handled. There's mistrust. Too bad. Then vote in somebody who you trust, because that community, a minority community, has consistently voted in that guy who's in charge of this this whole prosecution. Now they want him out, but they keep voting him in. You know, you can't have it every which way.
Well, no, you can't have it every which way. And actually, a lot of African-American leaders and commentators have pointed to the fact that folks in Ferguson and in St. Louis County do need to come out in better numbers, specifically referring to African-Americans, to vote in different civic leaders. However, the county prosecutor, for instance, who does not have a lot of goodwill with the African-American community, is someone who's not elected by the people in Ferguson. He's elected by people countywide. And again, I'm not saying that the prosecutor has done something, you know, corrupt or illegal or wrong here, but by all accounts, he does not have a reservoir of trust with people in that community that he's going to handle this in a way that's fair and balanced. Whether or not that's true or not, I think that's one of the things that people are reacting to. Back to your point about rioting, look, there was some initial looting, there was some initial property damage in those first couple of days after Michael Brown was shot. We've seen weeks and weeks of nonviolent protests here, so I don't think there's a reason at this point to speculate that there's just going to be massive rioting. You know, could a window get broken? Yes. Could property be damaged? Yes. There's no condoning that under any circumstances from my point of view, Steve. But by and large, we've seen overwhelmingly peaceful protests here. And I think, and those protests probably will continue if there's no charges brought against Wilson. I do agree with that.
And look, I hope you're right. I hope, don't get me wrong, but you really think that if there's no indictment, the most you're going to have is a broken window?
I'm not, again, I don't want to characterize it like that. Look, I can't speak for everybody who is expressing their frustration in Ferguson, in St. Louis. Maybe there will be some violence and some destruction of property. I sincerely hope not. I just want to emphasize the fact that what we've seen in the last 2 months overwhelmingly has been peaceful demonstrations that have not always been met peacefully by law enforcement. So I just think we got to have some sort of balance about this. Look, if someone...
Well, there's also been shots fired and bottles thrown in the last 2 months as well. So police have a right to protect themselves. You know, it reminds me of Mark Lamont Hill, who while this was all going on, and once a curfew was instituted, he went on the air the next day and said, I was this, I was that, the cops did this to me. But then he admitted, yeah, I broke the curfew. Well, you know what? What do you want?
Well, look, Steve, all I will say about that is this. Look, yes, police do have a right to defend themselves if they're being attacked physically. There's no question about that. But whether it's a protest or they're investigating a crime or whatever, police have a job to do, and they do have circumstances where they have the right to use force, even deadly force, to protect themselves. I do think, though, that equally citizens, and I've said this before, citizens have the right to protest and express their frustration in a peaceful way with their civic authorities, and they've done that in over and over and over again in Ferguson, and many times not been met with the respect they should be accorded as citizens.
All right, David, we'll see what happens, and we appreciate you coming on as always. David Swerdlick, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll be back with the editor-at-large at RU Media, PJ Media, RU, Brian Preston. Don't go away.
You've heard it said, death and taxes are the only two certainties in life. Well, you can avoid some taxes. For example, by putting your life insurance in a trust for your children, you're protecting them from paying the IRS upon your death.
Putting life insurance in trust for your children really accomplishes a couple different things. First of all, when life insurance is in a trust and when you pass away, those life insurance proceeds are not part of your estate. By putting them in a trust, it keeps it outside of your estate. And when you make your premium payments for your life insurance, it's the equivalent of giving a gift to your children. So you do your annual gifting, in some cases by paying life insurance premiums, and it also keeps all the proceeds out of your estate and free of estate taxation.
If your spouse is the beneficiary of your policy, then there's nothing to worry about. Spouses can transfer assets to each other tax-free.